The person you think you are is about to be exposed as a costume. Layers of false identity that you have worn for years, perhaps decades, are being peeled away by divine earthquake. What remains after the shaking will astound you, because underneath every mask you have learned to wear, beneath every role you have performed to survive, beyond every expectation you have tried to fulfill, lies the person God actually created you to be. And this month, that person is breaking free. This is not about self-improvement or personal development. This is about divine demolition of everything fake that has accumulated around your true identity like sediment over buried treasure. The shaking that begins this month will strip away layers of pretense, performance, and protection that have hidden your authentic self from the world and from yourself. What you discover when the dust settles will be someone you barely remember but have always known was there. For years you have been building an identity based on what others needed you to be, what circumstances required you to become, what survival demanded you to project. Child of dysfunction, you became the peacemaker. Victim of rejection, you became the people pleaser. Product of criticism, you became the perfectionist. Survivor of betrayal, you became the self-protector. Layer after layer, mask upon mask, until the real you became buried so deep that you forgot who you were before the world taught you who to be. But God never forgot. While you were constructing elaborate personas to navigate life's challenges, heaven maintained detailed records of your original design. While you were adapting, adjusting, and accommodating to fit into spaces that were never meant for you, the divine architect preserved blueprints of who you were created to be before fear taught you to hide, before pain taught you to perform, before disappointment taught you to defend. The identity earthquake that begins this month operates according to spiritual seismology that targets only what is not authentically you. Like a divine demolition expert, God knows exactly which structures are load-bearing elements of your true self and which are merely cosmetic additions that can be safely removed. The shaking will be precise, dismantling what needs to go while preserving what belongs to your core identity. This process may feel disorienting because you have become so accustomed to operating from false versions of yourself that authenticity feels foreign. The person emerging from beneath the layers may seem like a stranger at first, even though this person represents the truest version of who you have always been. It is not that you are becoming someone new, you are returning to someone original. The earthquake begins with subtle tremors that manifest as increasing discomfort with patterns, relationships, and situations that once felt normal. You find yourself questioning why you say yes to things you want to refuse, why you perform roles that drain rather than energize you, why you tolerate environments that diminish rather than enhance your spirit. These questions are not signs of ingratitude or rebellion. They are evidence that your authentic self is stirring beneath layers of learned behavior. As the shaking intensifies, you may notice that masks you have worn effortlessly for years suddenly feel heavy and uncomfortable. The people-pleasing persona that once protected you from conflict begins to feel suffocating. The perfectionist identity that once earned approval starts to feel exhausting. The self-deprecating humor that once deflected criticism becomes impossible to maintain. These are not personality flaws emerging. These are false identities losing their grip on your true self. The identity earthquake exposes the difference between who you are and who you have learned to be by creating friction between authentic responses and conditioned reactions. Situations that once triggered automatic people-pleasing responses now generate authentic boundary-setting impulses. Circumstances that previously activated perfectionist panic now produce genuine acceptance of imperfection. Relationships that formerly demanded constant performance now reveal your desire for authentic connection. This friction between false and true identity creates the seismic activity that characterizes the earthquake phase of your transformation. You feel pulled in different directions because part of you wants to maintain familiar patterns while another part insists on authentic expression. The tension between these competing impulses generates the internal shaking that ultimately fractures the structures that have contained your true self. But the earthquake is not random destruction. It follows fault lines that have existed since the false identities were first constructed. Every time you compromised your authentic nature to gain approval, you created a crack in your identity foundation. Every moment you performed rather than simply being, you weakened the structural integrity of your false self. The earthquake simply follows these existing fractures until the artificial construction collapses, revealing what was always underneath. The demolition process reveals that much of what you considered essential to your identity was actually adaptive response to temporary circumstances that became permanent patterns. The shy child who learned to be invisible for protection, the wounded adolescent who learned to be aggressive for survival, the disappointed young adult who learned to be cynical for self-preservation. These adaptations served their purpose in their season, but they were never meant to become permanent identities. As the false layers crumble, you begin to remember aspects of yourself that existed before life taught you to hide them. Creative impulses that were discouraged until you forgot you had them. Leadership qualities that were criticized until you learned to suppress them. Compassionate instincts that were exploited until you decided to withhold them. These qualities did not disappear. They went underground, waiting for safe conditions to resurface. The earthquake creates those safe conditions by removing the threats that originally drove these qualities into hiding. The critical voices that silenced your creativity lose their authority when you stop trying to please them. The controlling personalities that suppressed your leadership lose their influence when you stop performing for their approval. The manipulative individuals who exploited your compassion lose their access when you stop pretending to be what they need. But the most profound aspect of the identity earthquake is the revelation that your true self possesses qualities you never recognized because they were always covered by false identities. Strengths that were hidden beneath weakness, confidence that was buried under insecurity, wisdom that was concealed by confusion. These qualities emerge not as new acquisitions, but as discoveries of what was always there. The person revealed by the earthquake often surprises not only you, but also those who thought they knew you. Family members may be shocked to discover that the accommodating relative they took for granted actually has strong opinions and firm boundaries. Friends may be amazed to learn that the self-deprecating companion they enjoyed actually possesses remarkable talents and deep insights. Colleagues may be astounded to find that the background team player they overlooked actually carries natural leadership abilities and innovative ideas. These revelations can create temporary turbulence in relationships as people adjust to interacting with your authentic self rather than your adapted personas. Some relationships may not survive the transition because they were built on false identities rather than genuine connection. Others may deepen and strengthen because they were always seeking authentic relationship but had to settle for whatever version of yourself you were willing to show. The identity earthquake also reveals the enormous amount of energy you have been spending to maintain false identities, the constant vigilance required to remember which mask to wear in which situation, the exhausting effort needed to perform rather than simply be, the draining work of monitoring reactions to ensure your persona remains convincing. When these artificial structures collapse, the energy that was devoted to maintaining them becomes available for expressing your authentic self. This energy liberation often manifests as sudden clarity about life direction, unexpected confidence in decision-making, and surprising effectiveness in areas where you previously struggled. It is not that you have gained new capabilities, but that you are finally accessing abilities that were always yours but were suppressed by false identity maintenance. Your authentic self operates with natural efficiency that manufactured personas cannot match. The earthquake phase of identity transformation typically includes a period of grieving for the false selves that are being dismantled. Even though these personas were artificial constructions, they provided familiarity and perceived security. Letting go of them can feel like losing parts of yourself, even when you recognize that these parts were never genuinely yours. This grief is normal and necessary as you transition from who you learned to be to who you actually are. During this grieving process, you may experience temporary identity confusion as old patterns dissolve, but new authentic behaviors have not yet fully established themselves. You know who you no longer are, but who you truly are may still be emerging. This liminal space between false and true identity requires patience and faith that authentic self will prove more stable and satisfying than artificial personas ever were. The reconstruction phase that follows the earthquake involves learning to operate from your true identity rather than adapted personas. This requires developing new reflexes, establishing authentic boundaries, and expressing genuine thoughts and feelings that may have been suppressed for years. It means risking disapproval from people who preferred your false selves and trusting that authentic relationships will prove more rewarding than performed ones. But reconstruction also involves discovering how your authentic identity engages with the world differently than your false personas did. Your true self may be more direct than your people-pleasing persona, more creative than your conformist identity, more confident than your insecure adaptation. Learning to express these authentic qualities appropriately requires practice and patience as you develop skills that false identities never needed. The identity earthquake also reveals how your authentic self relates to your purpose and calling in ways that false identities never could. Artificial personas were designed for survival and acceptance, not for fulfillment and impact. Your true self carries capacities that align with divine purposes in ways that manufactured identities cannot access. The gifts, talents, and calling that emerge from your authentic identity often surprise you with their power and natural fit. As the dust settles from the identity earthquake, what remains is not a perfect person, but an authentic one. Someone who no longer needs to pretend, perform, or project false images to navigate life. Someone who can engage with the world from a place of genuine strength rather than adapted weakness. Someone who can form relationships based on true connection rather than mutual performance. Someone who can pursue purposes that align with authentic design rather than artificial construction. The person standing after the earthquake may not be who you expected to find beneath the layers, but this person will feel more genuinely yours than any identity you have worn. This is the person God created, the person heaven recognizes, the person your true friends were always hoping to meet. The earthquake was not destruction, it was excavation, not demolition but discovery, not loss but liberation. The shaking that felt like chaos was actually precision removal of everything that was not genuinely you. The disorientation that seemed destructive was actually divine archaeology, carefully uncovering treasure that was buried under years of adaptive response to temporary circumstances. The earthquake was mercy disguised as disruption, freeing you from identities that were too small, too false, and too exhausting to maintain. This month, as the identity earthquake continues its precise work, trust the process even when it feels uncomfortable. The tremors you experience are not random destruction, but strategic demolition of everything that has prevented you from being who you actually are. What survives the shaking is what truly belongs to you. What emerges from the rubble is who you were created to be before the world taught you to be someone else. The earthquake exposes false identity as temporary construction, while revealing authentic self as permanent foundation. This month, stop trying to hold together what was never meant to last, and start trusting what was always meant to remain. Your true identity is earthquake-proof because it was built by divine hands on eternal foundations. Let everything else shake loose. What belongs to you cannot be destroyed. What is genuinely yours will survive every tremor. The identity earthquake is not coming. It is here. The false structures are already shaking. The authentic foundation is already being revealed. This month you discover who you really are beneath every mask you learned to wear. The person emerging from the shaking is the person you were always meant to be. Welcome home to your true self. But the earthquake brings with it one final revelation that will complete your understanding of this divine demolition. The false identities that are being shaken loose were never random constructions. They were strategic defenses built by a soul that was protecting something precious until it was safe to reveal it. Your people-pleasing persona was not weakness. It was a guard protecting your authentic kindness until you could express it without being exploited. Your perfectionist identity was not insecurity. It was a shield defending your genuine excellence until you could demonstrate it without being criticized. Your self-protective isolation was not fear. It was a fortress safeguarding your true vulnerability until you could share it without being betrayed. The earthquake reveals that these false identities served their protective purpose, but they were always meant to be temporary structures, not permanent residences. Like scaffolding around a building under construction, they provided support during vulnerable phases of development, but were always intended to be removed once the authentic structure was strong enough to stand on its own. This month marks the completion of construction on your true identity, making the scaffolding of false personas obsolete. The divine timing of this earthquake is precise. It occurs not when you are weak and need protection, but when you are strong enough to live authentically. Not when revealing your true self would be dangerous, but when expressing your authentic nature has become not only safe but necessary for your continued growth. The earthquake happens because you are finally ready to be who you actually are, not because you are being forced to abandon who you think you should be. This readiness manifests as an inner knowing that the cost of maintaining false identities now exceeds their protective benefits. The energy required to sustain artificial personas has become greater than the risk of living authentically. The pain of hiding your true self has grown more uncomfortable than the vulnerability of revealing it. This internal shift creates the conditions that trigger the divine earthquake, ensuring that the demolition occurs when you are spiritually and emotionally prepared to handle the reconstruction. The aftermath of the identity earthquake reveals landscape that initially appears unfamiliar but gradually feels like home. The terrain of your authentic self may seem foreign at first because you have been living in the artificial environment of false identities for so long. But as you explore this rediscovered territory, you find that it fits you perfectly because it was designed specifically for who you actually are rather than who you thought you needed to be. Learning to navigate life from your true identity requires developing new skills and establishing different patterns, but these adjustments feel natural rather than forced because they align with your authentic nature. The effort required to maintain artificial personas is replaced by the ease of simply being yourself. The constant decision-making about which mask to wear is eliminated by the simplicity of consistent authentic expression. The people who remain in your life after the earthquake are those who were always seeking genuine relationship with your true self, even when they could only access your false personas. These relationships deepen and strengthen as authentic connection replaces performed interaction. The relationships that cannot survive the earthquake were built on mutual false identity and were never sustainable anyway. Their departure creates space for new relationships based on genuine compatibility with your true self. Your authentic identity also reveals purpose and calling that false personas could never access because they were designed for protection rather than expression. Your true self carries gifts, talents, and passions that align with divine purposes in ways that manufactured identities never could. The work you are